All right. So ladies and gentlemen, we have every month for professional learning opportunities, we, as you are fully aware, we have been responding to your requests. And um, part of my work and my whole entire life of almost 30 years I've always had the fortune of addressing ELLs with disabilities. And this platform gives me that ability as well. We have organized a task force. And the beauty about this task force is that it is a joint effort at the state. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ron Wu, who is the executive director of our NYU statewide language RBERN. And Lourdes Roa, oh, you're here. Okay, sorry, we made a little error there, Lourdes.
Okay, we're here.
Yes.
There were about 6 or 7 of us in the other room, so they'll all be joining in a minute.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, so I would
Ron is going to be managing the PowerPoint when he gets on.
Yep.
Ron is on. So I'm just trying to introduce you.
Great.
So ladies and gentlemen, this is Lourdes Roa, Executive Director from Mid-West RBERN. And as I mentioned to you, Ron Wu, Executive Director of the Language RBERN. And so they're going to be presenting to you today on our ELLs with disabilities. So I'll turn it over to Ron and Lourdes. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Elisa. Sorry for being late, folks, but we're glad we're here. And I do want to just say a little bit about the introductions. Ron and I kind of go back working on this particular topic back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Ron, I know Ron was working in New York City and Jose P, and I was a former CETRIC. So this topic of ELLs with disabilities this is a topic that's near and dear to our heart. We have history and we're very passionate about. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about what's been going on. There's some current things happening with ELLs and students with disabilities, that ELLs who also have disabilities, and where the two worlds intersect. We know that the bilingual teacher and bilingual special ed teacher shortage has been an ongoing thing in New York State. And New York State has funded the Clinically Rich Intensive Teacher Institute for quite a few years. The Office of Special Ed is also working with the Clinically Rich Intensive Teacher Institute. You may know it as CRITI. I'm just going to review some of the acronyms to make sure everybody here is familiar with those acronyms. But so that is one area that is certainly an area of need that's been around and has ebbed and flowed at different times throughout our history. The multi-tiered systems of support framework is also something that the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages, thank you, John, for putting that in the chat. The MTSS, that's that other acronym, the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages is now part of that committee, which is important. It's not just an Office of Special Education initiative, but it also now is including our folks from the Office of Bilingual Ed and World Languages. So the other goals for that MTSS framework includes a couple more acronyms, the RTI, Response to Intervention, and the PBIS, Positive Behavior and Intervention Support Services. So those 3 areas are addressed, looking at ways that we can support ELLs prior to being identified as having a disability, but also those who are currently identified of having some disabilities and need some supports. This next bullet is something that I'm super excited about, because the alternative English language proficiency assessment is something that we have been, in our region in Midwest, we have been talking about for a long time, having an alternate assessment for our more severely impacted or disabled ELLs, an alternative to the nicest slot. So we know a lot of our students that have the alternate assessment for ELA are also entitled and should be provided an alternate English language proficiency assessment. So this group that's working on that, that's a current project and we're very excited. That's the Office of State Assessment and the Office of Bilingual Ed and World Languages. Thank you very much, Elisa and her team for that. The next bullet is talking about our ELL and Students with Disabilities Task Force. Ron and I are co-leaders of that task force, and in this, you'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment, but this task force was brought together, Office of Special Education, OBEWL, under the tutelage of Elisa. So we've been, during our COVID time, trying to connect and really bringing some issues to the forefront and taking care of some of the needs and see where our worlds intersect and we could support each other to make sure our ELLs with disabilities have everything they need. And then it's the issue of over-identification of ELLs that we will look at some data in a moment. Ron will walk us through some of the data, but that's an ongoing issue, not only in New York State, but certainly in New York State that we want to discuss. So the next slide, talking more about our task force. Is it frozen? Sometimes it does that. Okay, so the task force, our group, our goal, our purpose is to make sure that we are communicating and that the services provided for ELLs with disabilities and those suspected of having disabilities are fully aligned and that they complement each other. So the Commissioner's Regulations Part 200, Commissioner's Regulations Part 154, making sure that there's not any, inconsistencies or things, gaps that we need to look at. So making sure that that is policy, that is being looked at in policies and decisions and protocols. The task force will be looking at that. We currently have some.
Hey. Oh yeah, I'll be down.
Oh, it doesn't matter. You don't have to, or you
Somebody not muted.
get to.
Okay, I'll just be down as like a set of eyes.
Marsha, please mute.
Okay. I can't see who it is, so I would say hello, thank you for sharing, but I don't see who it is. So yes, we want to make sure that our task force is looking at the regulations, processes, and services, also looking at common areas of need. We know that in both of our worlds, our students are often marginalized. No problem, Marsha. And we want to make sure that the equity issues for both of our populations are addressed. And looking at the over-identification and disproportionality of ELLs in special education is a significant issue. I'm going to turn the time over to Ron. We're going to look at some data and then we'll get some feedback and some input from all of you. But really, we wanted to take a look at what the situation is in terms of the data.
So hi, everyone. And so let's begin. We just wanted to start by contextualizing what this data looks like. So before you have three different pie charts. The first one on the left talks about all students in our New York State. And it tells you that in the state of New York, there are about 10.3% who are ELLs. And then we looked at all students who have IEPs, all about special ed students. And we find that there's a slightly larger amount of ELLs in that middle group, about 12.6%. And then we decided to look a little further into what the proportionality of folks look like. And we looked at all about ELLs. And what we found was an astonishing 22.8% of our ELLs have IEPs, which is more than double the general population. And that's a cause for us to sort of think and reflect on why could this be. We also looked at the different languages that our ELLs come with. So in the left-hand chart, you'll see that we have our ELLs without IEPs. And if you look closely at the top 5 languages, you'll notice that it's Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Bengali, and Russian. However, when you go over to the chart on the right and you look at the ELLs with IEPs, you'll see that there's a difference in the languages. You'll find that Haitians bumped up 2 more slots and took over the 5th slot as among one of the top 5 language groups who have IEPs, who are ELLs. Interesting data, cause for us to do a little more thinking. But as we know, on a national level, we've already talked about ELLs and the national report. And just so that you know, this report came from the Office of English Language, English OELA from the federal government, gave us this data. And what we can see from this data is that there are some disabilities that have disproportionalities. So one of them we looked at was specific learning disabilities. There's almost a 13% difference between the two. And that sort of caused us to look at New York State data. But we went more than just looking at the difference between ELLs versus non-ELLs. What we did was we looked at the data by language, and we took the top 5 language groups who are ELLs with IEPs, and we looked at it. So on this side of the world, you'll see that in speech and language learning, if you were to look at the different bars and they're broken down by language, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, Bengali, Haitian Creole, and we compared it against the non-ELLs who also have that disability. One would expect that disabilities do not change because of language, culture, or race, or anything else like that, that there should be almost parity across all of the disabilities by language. So if you were to look at speech and language impairment, one would expect, if you were to use non-ELLs as a standard, then most of our people would be focused around the 31% area in terms of proportion. But interestingly, what we found was that Spanish and Chinese speakers have a greater disproportionality. They're disproportionate by somewhere between 10 and 15%. So that causes us to sort of stand up and look some more. So why is this happening? So that's one area to look at. And then the second piece is we also look at lower disproportionalities. So there are disproportionalities that are high and disproportionalities that are low. So we looked at learning disability. Again, if you were to look at the non-ELLs, one should expect that all of the different language groups should be on par with the non-ELLs, around 46%. But what we're finding is that there are 2 language groups, Chinese and Bengali speakers, who are 20% less or 20% lower disproportionately than the other language groups. Again, the question is why? And these are questions that are floating across our heads. We don't have answers to it yet, but hopefully what we like is for you to help us answer those questions. So what we would like you to do in helping us work through supporting our ELLs with disabilities is starting with this first question. What do you think may be the cause of these disproportionalities? As Lourdes says, I can't see who's raising their hands, but what we would like you to do is at least record some of your thinkings about this in the chat room, because we will be looking and following up on the comments that you're leaving in the chat room for us so that we can further our research and that kind of thing. So that's the first question. What do you think may be the cause of these disproportionalities? Feel free to jump in with your comments. We're going to take about 5 or 6 comments before we go to the next one. I hear silence.
Well, they're typing in the chat as asked.
Oh.
So I see someone's already written in about assessment tools utilized are not designed for students who are ELLs,
Okay.
and teachers may not be appropriately trained to support struggling ELLs or prepared. Lack of understanding regarding language transfer, absolutely. Some great ideas. Interventions for bilingual students are limited. Madeline says lack of teacher training and differences between language learning and learning disability, specifically for clinicians. Assessments are either in English or Spanish, but our students are using both. It is hard to determine dominance and what language is appropriate for some of our ELLs. Wondering in the underrepresented groups, is there a benefit of the doubt factor for some students and not for others? Interesting. It's a good question, Liz. And Janita, having one view of language development and acquisition. Not enough bilingual psychologists or assessments, that's true. Distinguishing between speech and language impairments and language acquisition. Yes, Yolanda, that's come up. Inaccurate use of assessments for ELLs. Perhaps there are less bilingual teachers trained in less popular languages like Bengali. That's a good point.
Great. Lourdes, thank you. Thank you for reading from the chat room for this. And please continue to put in more comments into the chat room, into the chat, so that we have a record of some of the things that we may have to deal with as a task force. The other question that we have for this area is, what do you think could be done to minimize these disproportionalities? So please put your notes into the chat room, and Lourdes, thank you for continuing to read these.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lots of good stuff, and you know, there was someone that mentioned, Fausto mentioned about cultural factors in terms of autism. Some parents may not want to get their children classified due to stigmas in their countries. Okay. Although ESSA has made some people believe that students will proceed with language acquisitions 1, 2, and 3 years in, I think that's what you mean. And if not, I lost it. There must be a disability. Oh, that's an interesting point, Sharon. Encourage district-wide education and training. And it can't just be for the ELL and bilingual staff, it's for everyone, correct? Reach out to test developers to advocate for testing in other languages. That's a great suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Culturally and linguistically diverse families may not discuss concerns with pediatricians in schools. More education on SPED. Many parents may be afraid, ashamed to have their children diagnosed. Someone put in a link to prepscholar.com, the ACT prep for ESL and bilingual students.
No, my apologies. That was the wrong copy.
Oh, okay.
I was meaning to, I sent a private message to Yang, and I was meaning to put it on everyone, and I was trying to copy it, and they're copied.
Okay, that's all right.
Thank
I
you.
thought, oh, maybe they have something for our students.
No, thank you. I apologize.
Culturally responsive lessons. Thank you, Louis. Not providing sufficient RTI and AIS prior to initial referral. More awareness about teaching language with language distance knowledge in mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, everyone. Just please continue to put in any more thoughts that you have into the chat, and we'll see what we can do with them. But I'd like to just turn the screen over to turn the next slide over to Lourdes, who will continue with this thinking process that we want to hear from you.
Yeah, one of the issues that we're doing with our task force, so I didn't mention that the first thing you're going to see from the task force is some parent guides, and that will be coming out. But we're also looking for best practices. We thought this is a great time to ask you if in your area, your regions, your experiences, your districts, if there are, the two areas of ELLs and students with disabilities, if they intersect in a way that is beneficial and that you can share with us today. That would be something we would want to talk about. So I know that's a loaded question, right? But we know that sometimes there might be ways that your teams come together to maybe your SPED teams, your CSE teams, Committee on Special Educations, with your ELLs or with your psychologists. If there's anything that's working, let us know.
Yeah, so if you can put that into the chat as well. I have to apologize. I can't look at the chat because I'm controlling the PowerPoint. But if somebody can volunteer to read some of them from the chat, it would be great.
I can continue to read them too, because it's right on my screen, Ron.
Great.
So people are still putting in about some of the other reflections that we had asked for. But Kathleen mentioned that if she's curious about what the numbers may look like as students return to in-person instruction, whereas it's, instruction has been impacted or interrupted, if that's going to impact our data, if that's what you mean. And we just thought, since we have a captive audience here, it was really great. So here is something that someone added. I have two twice exceptional students that came to me from other school districts with notes in their IEPs that they are selective mute. The first student talked to me nonstop from the time he jumped off of the bus. The second student may have some not yet diagnosed notes of autism, but he does speak. Let me see, somebody else. Identify signs that they may lead to testing to prevent. All right. I'm sorry, my chat. I'm going to open it up bigger to be able to see the whole chat. At times, ELLs and students are programmed together, although they require different services. That is one of the issues, and finding time that the special education services can be given its due diligence, as well as the E&L time. See, discrepancy in grade placements, students with disability, third grade levels for contiguous placement. And ELLs have 2 years for contiguous placement. That's an interesting thing, Linda. That is something that has been discussed. So students that are in bilingual programs, but for bilingual special ed, they can be placed in a 3-year contiguous program. That's my understanding. Let's see if there's anything else. So I want to keep it open. Was somebody going to say something? Well, I wanted to. Yeah, go ahead.
It is. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, who else? Okay.
No, go
Can I
ahead.
go? Okay, thanks. So I've gotten, well, there's a little bit of a trend coming now that I get my preschoolers registering for kindergarten with a long list of IEP, and when we as a team interview the student and get to know them a little bit better, out of those 5 IEPs we got, 3 were very clearly ELLs. And of course, they put like speech problems, not pronouncing the ending of the word, or not using pronouns, which is all kind of in sync with their home language. And then the one little student just had the rhythm and stress and intonation of the Chinese language when he was speaking English, but he's a very young one, 4 years old. He hasn't had any English speaking friends. He has not gone to preschool yet. Somehow they've got an IEP for him, and And I'm a little concerned about this. So I was wondering if you or anybody else had any experiences like that.
No, but I will say that someone else put in the chat that they are concerned. They've been working for years on reducing the number of inappropriate referrals with school-age children. And yet there's an inundation of preschool ELLs with disabilities. And I think that's a really interesting piece to note. And Ron, we should take a look at that, because if there's an overrepresentation of ELLs that are in preschool being identified, that might give us some information too. Elisa?
Yeah, I'm going to take advantage and address that a little bit by saying that we are working with our early childhood department at the state, and we will be presenting new regulatory language and changes in order to be linguistically aware for the diversity of our youngsters coming in, and helping the teachers and school administrators start thinking about and helping them make decisions, as opposed to providing a referral or making a referral on behalf of the student simply because they have a home language other than English in their household. So that is forthcoming. We have been working with the early childhood department to make regulatory changes and awareness there. So that's one area that would help improve. I wanted to take advantage. There was a comment. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. I'm going to check with Chris Soriano, who is the Assistant Commissioner of Special Education, but I do not believe, I saw something about continuous grades, 3 grades in one class. That's not appropriate unless
That's in special ed. It's allowable in special education.
Yeah, that's in the special ed.
3 grades.
It's for
Yes.
small class settings,
Yes, for K, yeah, for
like
for
the self-contained.
811, 1211 classes. Yes, they can do 3 contiguous grades,
For 811,
or 15-1 or 1211. Yes,
I don't,
it's in part 200. It's not a part
Okay.
154. It's a part 200 law.
okay. I'll double check. I'm still not clear on that. And even if it's not great practice, I'm gonna have a conversation with Chris, because I mean, I don't know. It depends on the district and the size, but
So self-contained classes can be K12, 4, 5, 6.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
there's a very small number of students in
Yeah.
each one of those classes.
Yeah.
okay.
So this is, hi, this is Maria Angelica. So this is where the question becomes, what oversteps what? Because CR Part 154 does indicate that we should not have, when it comes to English language learners, that we should not have more than 2 contiguous grades. So now for our duly identified students, that now becomes which one oversteps which one.
Yeah, and that's there was some conversation in the chat about that, and people were saying there is a common belief in some committees on special education that the special education services in Part 200 is what rules, but we know that it's not, that they're both equally valuable, Part 154 and Part 200. So it is important that we look at any areas that might contradict and create that seamless alignment so that everyone knows. Yeah.
Right, and this is where we must, as linguistic experts, we must sit at those tables.
Yes.
When it comes to discussion of our students who are differently abled and also English language learners, multilingual learners. It is critical that we sit at those tables, because although it may be a proper setting for their disability, but 3 contiguous grades, when you're looking at 3 different curriculum, and the rigors of all 3, and we have to provide the scaffolds and the supports to our children, both academically and linguistically, it may not be the most proper thing to do.
So it's very important that, is always at every CSE meeting, either an ENL teacher or a bilingual teacher, someone that understands the language development of the child, to talk to the whole child and not just their progress in ENL, but as to how they are progressing as a language learner or as a learner. And so that they should always be part of those meetings. And I know historically there's some districts that has not been supported. So I thank you for saying that, because we need to be at all of the tables when there's an L that is differently abled or has a suspected disability, to be able to talk to their cultural and linguistic development.
I just got a clarification, because according to what Part 154 actually stipulates, that there's an exception. We were just talking about it in the chat box here, but I just want to make sure that
Take a look at it.
The same guidance here, because Part 154 says if there's a special class, we are able to do that exception, and so it does have that, and it refers to Part 200.
Yes. So that's right. You're right that if the student has a disability, they can be in a bilingual special ed class with.
No, we're talking about service. Talking about the maximum allowable grade span for grouping instruction for ENL.
Yes.
And bilingual instruction, but it's not the same thing. I just want to make sure that we're clear. Grouping some students and then providing that service that's what stipulates. So I mean, we're talking. It's similar. But I think some of the colleagues have been saying here that it's not allowed, and it is allowed. It's an exception.
So Felipe, you're talking about, I'm looking at what you wrote in the chat. I'm going to read it. The maximum allowable grade span for grouping instruction in grades K through 12, English as a new language, or bilingual education classes is 2 contiguous grades, except for learners in a special class, as defined by Part 200.1, correct?
That's correct.
That is what yes. So I'm agreeing with you. That is what and that was my understanding. Yes.
Yeah, so in practice, it looks in my self-contained class, special ed class. So I have the special ed group, and there are only 10 kids in there. 2 of them are ELLs, but I don't even take them out together because they have so many different needs. So I'm still not grouping my ELLs together. They each get my individual attention. So I think that's why it kind of fulfills those criteria with the Part 54.
Okay, folks. Look, I am very mindful of the limited time. And I want to thank all of you for your comments, and please continue to put them into the chat. And I'm going to stop sharing and turn the agenda back over to Elisa.